screen? I haven't got to.
Now it's completely, the floor is yours, and you just share the screen and you go ahead and do the session. That's it, we're set. And maybe I should just say that for people who want to drop questions in the chat, I will collate them. I'm going to mute people as well in the background, because there's some people maybe forgot to do that. Yeah, I'll collate the questions, and so you can drop them in the chat whenever they arise, and we'll discuss them later.
Perfect. So yeah, thanks ever so much for coming along, folks. This is what an absolute joy to see so many people potentially interested in agroforestry. And I was just saying before a few of you turned up, I recognise quite a few names here, which puts pressure on somewhat, particularly as the lovely chap that we've had some cows off is here as well. So I think they do feature Alistair, so you will see a photo of the lovely white galleries. So I'm going to share my screen in a second and we'll get started. I did put at the top of the chat, it'd be lovely to hear where you're from if you haven't put that in the chat already, just so we get an idea of where folk are situated. And also if there's anything you particularly want to get out of this session, it's helpful for me to know what your expectations are. So if you've got particular questions or things that you're hoping to go away with, then I can make sure I try and touch on those as we go through. I will start sharing the screen now. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep, I can see that very well.
Can you see that, Nina? Hang on, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to share the program rather than the screen. I've got two screens, and otherwise you'll have me looking. And right, can we see that? Oh, you're on mute, Nina.
Now we see more of your desktop rather than.
Oh, okay. I'm going to try again. Bear with me. PowerPoint slideshow. Share. How's that?
That's a black screen at the moment, but once you start, it might just change.
Oh.
Yes.
Very odd.
Perfect. Perfect. This is it. We've got it.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that? Oh, I'm worried now that I've done that. I've sort of.
So I tell you, I can now see your title slide, implementing agroforestry with native cattle as part of a healthy agroecosystem.
Perfect.
And there's some Twitter or Facebook handles
at the bottom.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Great stuff. So just bear with me 2 seconds, folks. I'm just going to get something else up so that I can have my notes, because I realized. Hang on. There we go. Right. And you can still just see the title slide. Yes, we're good. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, implementing agroforestry with native. Oh, go on.
Now,
what have you got now?
I have now resume slideshow and a cross.
Why is it doing this? Resume share. Yes. No.
Yeah, now we see the PowerPoint with the slides and the slides on the side.
Oh, okay, that's really.
Can you now just click slideshow?
Yeah, but I already have that open, so I'm not sure what's gonna happen. Right, I'm gonna. Sorry, everybody. Bear with me. I don't know why it's PowerPoint share. Are you getting the slide or the edit screen?
Yeah, the edit screen.
Okay. It's really weird because I've got the slide in front. I've got both.
Do you want me to try? You can. And sharing my screen and you tell me.
Yeah, sorry everybody. I don't know. Yeah, go on. Let's do that. I'll stop sharing.
Not that I'm, can't promise that. Let's see what happens.
That's fine.
Let me just see.
While you're doing that, I'm going to read through and see who we've got. So we've got Robert in Lancaster, Aideen from Cambridge, Clem. Hi, Clem. Lovely to see you. Matthew Hay, based in Edinburgh and Perthshire. Okay, so you've heard extensive cattle grazing and agroforestry offer a fantastic way for farmers to contribute. That's interesting. I'm going to keep the word extensive in my head because that's something I want to potentially challenge at some point during the discussion, so we can talk about that. We've got Bill and Elwyn, and oh, hi Roz, nice to see you. And we've got John. Great, lots of folk.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and let me see if I can then also just, and can you see that now?
Yep.
Yeah.
We're missing the picture behind, but I think that's because the version I sent you had a bit of a wobble, so that's fine.
All
so
right.
We'll go with that. That's absolutely great.
Okay.
So thanks everybody for being patient with us. We're there now. Yeah, so thanks so much for coming along. I've just put my social media handles there. At How Mill is generally me, and at Grampian Graziers is generally my husband James, and our website is there as well if you're interested. You can find out a bit more about us. Next slide please, Nina. So some context, you might need to just click through these, sorry, they were animations. So I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about me so you get to know who I am. So I have a background in education. I still do majority of my paid employment in education. My job before I moved to Scotland, I was head of department at a land-based college, and we moved up to Scotland about 2.5, nearly 3 years ago. We have 18 acres at home, so we're in Aberdeenshire on the River Devon. A really beautiful part of Aberdeenshire, which is just near the Murray border, and it's kind of just far enough from Aberdeen so that it's not in the commuter belt, and it's just far away from the Whiskey Trail that it's not too touristy, so it's very quiet. We, over the last year or two, have secured about 220 additional acres through various licenses and grazing arrangements. We currently only have 10 cattle. We're a very small operation, plus 2 calves, and known affectionately, particularly if you follow us already on social media, as the Wee Mob. My husband is trained in holistic management, and I'm currently undertaking an MSc in sustainable food and natural resources, with just my dissertation to go. And my plan is that my dissertation is going to be focusing particularly on native cattle and agroforestry. I have a role with the PFLA, so the Pasture Fed Livestock Association. I'm their research coordinator, so I work between farmers and research group members and the academic community to kind of bridge the gap and ensure that we can share research. And I've recently been appointed a sustainable farming lead in Scotland for the Nature Friendly Farming Network. So just a quick plug that if you're not a member of either of those two organisations, I highly recommend becoming a member of both the NFFN, and you can become a supporter of the PFLA for free, or you can join as a member. I think it's £100 a year, and it's very much worth it, so I would say that. So yeah, just thought I'd get that plug in. So next slide please, Nina. I thought I'd talk a little bit about what we, our decision-making process, if you like. So I'm kind of taking it back a step. This is our meadow, looking down the river, or looking back up the river, sort of towards where Alistair Wilson, who's in this chat, sort of looking upriver towards where he is. We're about 57 degrees north. We get consistently between sort of -7 and -10 in the coldest winter months. We're pretty windy. We're in the Grampian foothills, so that proximity to the Cairngorms. We don't have any livestock barns. We have very little infrastructure. We've just got a very small byre. Within our 18 acres, we have 8 acres of native broadleaf woodland that was put in about 18 years ago. We're on what's classed as marginal grazing. It's a less favoured area. You wouldn't know it from looking at that lovely green sward, would you? But yeah, it is counted as marginal. So some of the grazing that we have is pretty much hill ground. We have very diverse native sports. There's a lot in that ground. It's not improved. It hasn't been kind of sown, and it's very much just what's there is there. And there's pretty boggy wet ground. So these were all considerations that we had to think about when we knew that we wanted to get cattle. You could click again. So we wanted to have cattle because we were really interested in the role that they play as ecosystem engineers. Clem Sanderson, who's in the group, who's in this chat, the session, has been brilliantly running the mob grazing field lab with the Soil Association of Scotland for a few years now, and has put on some really interesting events, one of which my husband went to, and met a guy called Rob Havard, who's holistic management kind of grazing expert, and he was talking about holistic management, holistic land grazing, and the benefits of cattle to biodiversity. So we knew that cattle were going to be the way forward for us to manage our land. We wanted something small, so we wanted small cattle. We wanted something ideally that was dual or even triple purpose, because we believe that cattle can fulfill multiple functions. So something that could do several jobs was important.
Things go out, 'cause I need.
Oh, got a bit of someone chatting in the background. We wanted, when we started looking at native breeds, we thought we'd like something on the RBST watch list. We knew we wanted something Scottish, living in Scotland, and we thought about having horned animals was kind of interesting, because a lot of animals have kind of genetics have been bred towards being polled now, so we wanted something quite traditional looking. And so if you kind of marry up all those factors, small cattle, dual purpose, hardy, you basically end up with Shetlands. So these were our first two heifers that we decided to go ahead and buy. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to share lots of pictures in this session, because yeah, I spend most of my time taking pictures of cattle in trees. So I've just wanted to illustrate some of the ground that we graze. So this is a neighbour's pasture. They invited us to go and graze it for them. This hasn't been grazed for about 30 years. And we have been working with them to include their ground in our grazing plan. So we use holistic planned grazing, as I've already mentioned, which is kind of inspired by the work of Alan Savory. Also can be known as tall grass grazing, mob grazing. There are some differences, but those might be terms you're familiar with. So we use electric fence, which you can see in the background here, to kind of create these small paddocks or cells, grazing cells, across really pretty rugged terrain. Just a very quick question that came up with what species. These are Shetlands. So next slide, please. So there's going to be lots of pictures just to give you an idea of the places that we graze. This is on the same patch of ground, but you can see not only are there broadleaf trees, there's some Scots pines and larches and some other coniferous trees as well. And interestingly, I know that cattle like eating trees, but it's only recently that I've realised they will happily eat coniferous trees as well. You get a wonderful whiff of 1980s toilet cleaner, pine fresh, when you walk past it after they've been eaten. Okay, next slide. I'm going to do a bit of an intro to agroforestry for anyone who doesn't really know what it is. There's been a few sessions here at the Northern Mill Farming Conference about agroforestry. Just in case you don't know what it is, I will give you a whistle-stop tour. So it's the practice of deliberately integrating woody vegetation, trees or shrubs, with crop and or animal systems to benefit from the resulting ecological and economic interactions. And that's a pretty nice definition there. So there's two different types, if you like. You have silver pasture, so silvo being trees, pasture being pasture and grazing. And that's the integration of trees and livestock. So the top photo, you can see, I think there might be sheep, goats, grazing underneath some trees there. So looks like those have been planned and planted as sort of alleyways. And then silvo arable, so again, trees plus crops. And that's something that we are seeing more and more of being developed. Now, this isn't a good example photo at the bottom. I'm not sure I'm particularly happy with the bare soil under those trees, but I think it's just to illustrate to you that quite often these would be planted in laneways so that you can get machinery down the alleys, and you're able to then harvest your crops and cultivate as you need to. So it's just a quick intro to what agroforestry is. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there are a number of ecosystem services that agroforestry can deliver. If you click through, Nina. So this is a really nice way of just depicting kind of what the benefits are, very simply. In forests, we get very little loss from the system. So not much leaching, not much runoff. We don't lose many of the nutrients. You know, they're pretty sort of self-sustaining systems. However, in our common kind of conventional agricultural systems, We don't get much plant cycling. We have low litter, so not much. A lot of people are moving towards cover crops now, but generally we don't have much of that. There's nutrients in unintercepted rainfall, so the rain just comes down, hits the soil, and washes everything away. You get that heavy leaching because of that, and lots of losses from the system. The ideal is agroforestry, where you're combining the best of both worlds, so that you can get useful services. So if you want to just click through, Nina, they should come up. So you get these useful services like food, fibre, fuel, shelter, carbon storage, water management, biodiversity enrichment, landscape enhancement, because it looks nice because there's trees there, benefits to animal welfare, nutrient cycling, and improved soil health. So the deeper roots that you get from your trees mean that you've got more nutrient exchange across the different levels of the soil profile. You get, it's nice and shaded, so you get more of a constant soil temperature. The soil doesn't bake in the summer and then get really kind of cold when the weather changes. So you just get kind of a more consistent and healthier ecosystem when you're bringing those trees into that, particularly in sort of the silver arable example. So just to give you, it was just to give you that brief overview, and I'm going to focus particularly on some of the benefits that agroforestry can deliver in a silvo pasture system, so in livestock system, particularly focusing on our native cattle. And I'm pretty obsessive about native animals, and I think that they do a fantastic job in, they're really suited to our environment. There's a reason that they've done so well here, and it's just because that genetically they've developed to be, to fit our niche, our kind of ecological niche as a country. So for us, kind of having those native cattle was really important, because it meant that we were able to kind of contribute to that maintenance of the breed and supporting the breed as a rare breed, but also then using agroforestry to do that, because we don't have much land kit or equipment. So next slide, please, Nina. So the main thing for us with the trees is shelter, and this is a massive benefit that agroforestry brings if you are grazing your cattle outside, particularly, well, all year round, really. Shelter is absolutely key for animals, and I think that people quite often think, because native breeds are hardy, that actually shelter is really an issue, but it really is. Shelter from the sun does prevent that heat stress, and I know that you might laugh that we might get heat stress in northeast Scotland, but it can happen. And heat stress really can reduce that productivity. There's lots of evidence that demonstrates dairy animal productivity is reduced. It can reduce conception rates in females. It can reduce that male animal fertility. And it can also, if an animal is heat stressed, it can limit immune system effectiveness. And just to reference here, this is from the Agroforestry Handbook, which is a fantastic resource that's free to download. It was developed by the Soil Association and the Organic Research Centre and the Woodland Trust and a number of other organisations. So that Pagella and Wistance is Tim Pagella and Lindsay Wistance, who wrote one of the chapters together. And I really recommend it. If you haven't got it, then go to the Soil Association website after my session and download it. Yeah, so that shelter really is beneficial, and we'll see in this warm summer months that the cattle will put themselves underneath the shade. Next slide, please, Nina. Thank you. So similarly, shelter in the winter is really key for the animals. So cattle generally tend to, I'm sorry if you can hear dogs bark in the background, so what's going on down there. Cattle generally are kind of trying to lower their temperatures because the activity in the rumen, they have quite a high, there's a lot of energy produced, and so cattle quite often work to bring their temperature down. So they maintain a good warmth most of the time. So a lot of people would think that when they're out in the snow and out in the cold, then they're kind of keeping themselves warm. But that's fine if it's not snowing, it's not raining, and there's no wind. The minute you introduce any kind of precipitation and any sort of wind chill factor, it can really affect the animal's productivity, and it can really decrease their ability to kind of cope with with the cold. So they will lose condition and they will eat more. So from an economic point of view, if you're having to buy in hay or you're having to make silage or whatever it is you're feeding your cattle, if you're not stockpiling deferred grass, so if you're having to then get that feed for them, it's going to be more expensive if they're cold and if they are if they're suffering from cold. I would really recommend that if you've got cattle and you're outwintering them, that having that access to trees is really important. And we have some strips of spruce trees that we don't graze during any time of the year other than the winter. So during the winter, we use our electric fence to create these paddocks around the create paddocks around the woods, around the spruce trees. And the cows can then get under those and they're kept nice and warm underneath the trees. If you go to the next picture and click through. So this photo was just after the previous one. So the previous photo on the previous slide, the photo on the left was just after that, and the photo on the right was the next morning. So you can see that we had quite a lot of snow overnight, and the cattle were just stayed under the trees. They didn't really get any snow on them. They were really cozy under there, and yeah, you could just see from the trees above and behind them, it's pretty heavily, they're pretty covered in snow, but it makes a real difference from having that shelter. Okay, next slide. I'm seeing some of the questions and the comments come up. I'm just wondering if we should stop for a second and just see if there's any questions before I carry on. Would that be helpful?
There's a couple of questions, maybe, Nick, that you might want to answer now, because Bill asked in the beginning what the main herb species are in your grassland. Okay.
So we have lots of tufted hairgrass and a bit of Molinia, but we also have lots of cocksfoot. We have Timothy, we have meadow foxtail, we have sweet vernal, grasses, and then the herb species, we have lots of docks, which I'm a big fan of, as are the cows. We also have dandelions. We have got lots and lots of different vetches. So we have tufted vetch, bush vetch, meadow vetchling. We have got lots of sorrel. Trying to think what else we have out there. We have, oh, I can see it, but I can't think what it's called. It'll come back to me. Yeah, I'll try and remember some of the others, but I can come back to those.
And then there was another question on whether your cattle have winter coats.
Yeah, they do. They get a lot fluffier, a lot hairier during the winter.
And then there was another question, which I'll keep for later, because I think it will be a longer discussion. Did you say they liked stock? A question just came in from Roz.
Yeah, they do indeed. And I can give them dock leaves as treats, and they quite enjoy that. So I'll talk a little bit about docks later on. There's a video including some docks, so we'll maybe come to that in a second. Okay, so nutrition. Trees have, so one of the real benefits of utilising agroforestry is the massive nutrition benefits that cattle and sheep, all livestock, can get from trees. So the way this works is that trees have these much deeper roots than grasses, and they're able to pull up a much wider range of nutrients across the soil profile. The trees can supply these nutrients such as manganese, selenium, copper to cattle, and quite often these are the sorts of things that you'll find in mineral licks. So willow and alder particularly accumulate high concentrations of zinc and cobalt, which means that if we integrate those trees into our grazing plan, it reduces the need for that additional bought-in minerals. Willow also contains salicylic acid, which is kind of a relative of aspirin, so it has pain relief benefits to cattle and to sheep. So there's this idea of like self-medicating. There's a fantastic resource that the wonderful Pen Rashbas shared with me, and Luska is a researcher that does quite a lot on agroforestry. I'm happy to share this PowerPoint if that's useful, and the link. But what actually, could you click on it, Nina? Click on the link so that we can just I can just show people this fantastic resource. It's basically this sort of open source web spreadsheet.
Now it crashed for me.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to the slide, but I don't think I can click on the link.
Okay, don't worry then, I'll just explain it. Basically, it's got all of the tree species that you'll find in Europe pretty much, and it gives you the different nutrient makeup or the nutrient level of the leaves that were tested. So the research team tested all these different tree leaves and twigs at different times of the year, and all of their data is collated into this massive spreadsheet. So if you're thinking, oh, I've got alder trees and I want to know what minerals they're particularly high in for my cattle, you can go to this website and just choose alder from the drop down list that gives you all of the different nutrient benefits that those trees have. So it's a really, really useful resource if you're thinking, my cattle might be low on this, so therefore what can I give them? There is evidence that anecdotally by farmers and historians that trees have really had that important role in feeding livestock. There is a history of feeding gorse to overwinter during overwinter fodder shortages, which is quite interesting. And I would say that using trees as fodder is really commonplace in tropical silvopasture systems. So there's about 30 years worth of research into agroforestry. And, you know, it kind of is becoming quite a cool thing that people are talking about now. But there's masses of research that's been around for a long time historically. And a lot of it is focused particularly on tropical systems. And there's just loads of really interesting stuff out there about, you know, we might think about the daily forage requirements of an animal in terms of dry matter and what that looks like in the grass and in the sward. But in a lot of tropical places, they will think about how many meters of hedgerow I need in order to produce milk from this cow for a year. So there's some really interesting kind of lessons that we can learn. So the work that Luska and there's a couple of other researchers, Van der Meulen, Ikeren, who have looked at the supply of nutrients, particularly zinc, manganese, selenium, copper, to cattle and to sheep. And I think it's really important to think about these kind of trace elements can be a much higher compared, so relative to pasture. And so things like cobalt is really important because it's a constituent of vitamin B12, and deficiencies can really manifest as a failure to thrive. I know of farmers who will say that their particularly sheep will lose condition, they'll have muscular wastage, kind of be anemic. And the way Claire Whittle is in the call, so as a vet, she's probably going to be able to give a lot more information than I can on that. But yeah, trees can really enable livestock to access that nutrient without the need for additional minerals. And quite often people will be giving their cattle or sheep, mostly sheep, a bolus. So if you don't know what that is, it's like a big pill that gets put into the animals. They basically swallow it and it sits in their stomach, and then it can release the nutrient. We aren't massively keen on interventions, so we try not to handle our cattle in terms of kind of putting them in a crush or being interventionists with them. We try and kind of let them, you know, our interaction with them be very positive. We don't really want to be buying in additional minerals as graziers and having cattle in lots of different places. And I know there's a number of other grazier people in the group. It can be quite difficult to kind of put animals through handling systems when you don't have like a central yard to bring them all to. So the idea of them being able to self-select what they need from the trees without us having to kind of take stuff to them is really attractive in terms of you know, why we want to go down this route and why we believe agroforestry is beneficial. You want to go on to the next slide, please. I've just got there just an example of some of the nutrients. So compared to perennial ryegrass, so these I collated from a range of different sources, and it's just indicative. So please don't kind of go away and think this is the be all and end all of milligrams per kilo. You know, this is I just wanted to give you an idea so that you could see the relative difference between zinc. You can see that in goat willow, zinc is much higher than perennial ryegrass. You can see that hazel has much higher copper, manganese obviously much higher in hazel, but then interestingly iron is higher in PRG. So it's just to kind of give you a flavour that there are differences between these trees compared to grasses that you might generally find in your sward. And so having things like zinc, which helps with healthy hooves and metabolic conversion, copper, which can contribute to bone growth and white blood cell function, so therefore immunity and immune system, and manganese, which can promote bone and cartilage growth, and enzyme production are obviously really important for the cattle. You should be able to play that video, Nina. Hopefully it will, that black square should be a video.
Okay, let me see. I don't think it wants to do that. It crashes my PowerPoint.
Okay.
Do you have, if you post, if you easily have accessible the link to that video, I can put it up.
I
post
do.
it in the chat.
So just give me a second and I will get that up. Sorry folks, bear with me. I've got an annoyed spaniel who's shouting at me downstairs as well, which is putting me off a little bit. Daisy. Sorry, give me 2 seconds. It's trying to log me in with the wrong account. Sorry, everybody, bear with me. I managed to get all these videos up onto YouTube, and now it's not wanting to let me.
Also really sorry that this isn't working better, but somehow my computer can't cope.
No worries. I'll tell you what, I'll try and open it from here. So I'm going to try and play it on my computer, which is what I don't want it to do. So sorry for the technical hitches, guys.
Do you want me to stop sharing so that you can share your screen?
Maybe. I'm not sure if it will. Why is it not letting me open it? Hang on. Sorry, this is not interesting for everybody else. Just hearing me muttering about why I can't open this video. I'll tell you what, I'm going to carry on, and then when we're at the end, I'll come back and show some of the photos, the video. That's okay. So I think that might be more helpful. So we'll go to the next slide, which is also a video.
Yeah.
Oh, are you all right to share?
Yes, I will. Just a minute. There we go. Got that?
Yeah, and if we just skip, oh, there's 4 slides of videos, so bear with us, everybody.
So we're going to just skip those 4 slides and we're going to get back to the video later.
Oh, I think I may.
Do you want to talk to that one?
Yeah. Natural behaviours is this other kind of real benefit to trees. So trees make the most perfect scratching post, which obviously will help cattle shed hair and dead skin. And they can also help to remove parasites such as ticks. So when you're kind of conservation grazing, if you like, and if you're grazing in these kind of quite wild, remote hillsides that we do, ticks can be a bit of an issue. So that kind of rubbing on the trees really helps the cattle get to those kind of itchy places. And there's some really interesting research that suggests that when in a silver pasture system, so I think this was research that was done by Amendola about 4 or 5 years ago, that the more stable social hierarchies existed with cattle in silver pasture than in just plain pasture. So the cattle were able to express more positive behaviours than those in a monocultural pasture system. And that is, they thought it was partly down to the defence option that trees give. So if you've got a couple of cows that are jostling for position in the hierarchy, kind of being able to get away and get behind trees means that the cattle just felt a bit safer and that they could kind of escape any bully cows or the ones that kind of take over and push everybody else around. So that was really interesting. And when we recently introduced new cattle to the herd, we were very quick to get them in a wooded area because we knew that they were going to be coming together and establishing the hierarchy. So having read that research, I thought, right, here's a way that we can use this to our advantage. We can get them into the trees and make sure that then, if they are kind of scrapping or they're not very happy, that they can kind of get away and hide behind the trees a little bit from each other. Right, there's another slide of video, so we'll come back to that afterwards. Right, this next one, if you could just go slowly, so just the first photo, please, Nina. So I want to talk a bit about the ecosystem engineering part that I mentioned right at the start. So here's my husband looking at a stretch of ground that, so to the left of the fence, so the side that James is on is our main big grazing area, kind of meadow. On the right hand side, you can see they're basically tufted hairgrass and gone to seed docks. And this is, and then on the above it where the trees are is a lane. So a really kind of rough, difficult bit of ground. We didn't really know what to do with it, so we thought, right, we're going to plant a hedge. The thought of having to plant a hedge into that was pretty frightening. So next photo, please. We brought in the cows. So we bale grazed our cattle up this section. And we basically put a bale of bales of hay down, and we directed their attention to where we wanted the hedge to go in. So we got them to kind of stomp and trample all over the area where we wanted the hedge to be planted, and it meant that they were also able to add manure, so their dung was going to be able to be added, and that would be beneficial to the hedge that we were going to plant. So if we can go next one. And you can then see with a little bit of siding, so a little bit of just extra help to clear some of the stuff out the way. This was just a month later. So we went from the picture on the far left to the picture on the far right within a month, just with cattle in there to kind of trample and a little bit of siding just to kind of even it out a bit, just to tidy it up before we then put the trees in. So that idea of kind of engineering an ecosystem and using the cattle as a tool is really important to us. You know, we're very low tech, we don't have any machinery, we don't have kind of, you know, anything that we could mow with other than a scythe, so it's quite small scale, and if we can get some of our cattle to do the hard work for us, then we absolutely will. So this kind of establishment of agroforestry as well, like getting the hedge in there, it's not just about putting cattle in the trees because there's multiple benefits. We were flipping it and thinking, well, how can we get our cattle to help us set up agroforestry? Okay, next one, please. So next picture. So again, just slowly through these. So the second part of this, so you can see then on the left, this is the hedge, and you can see the spiral guards, and that's what the hedge plants are in. And then all around it is a mixture of all different grasses and plants and phlox, nettles and buttercups and different grasses and things. So it was all getting quite weedy, and we didn't, not that I like the word weeds, but yeah, we could see that the competition was going to be quite difficult, you know, fierce for this sort of niche for this part of the ground. So next photo. So in come our second set of ecosystem engineers, our laying hens. So again, we had no sort of livestock or deer proofing fence on the left hand side, so we just put the one stop fence on the right, and we left the other side open intentionally so that we could use a movable poultry netting fence that allows us to move our hens up and down the hedge so that they can do a lot of the work for us. And if we just have the final picture, or next, I think there's maybe two more pictures, one more. So that's after the hens have been through. And then the photo on the right is where we then mulch with the bedding that comes out of the hen house. So the picture at the bottom, the reason that the hens scratch around the bottom of the hedge plants is because we are directing them there with their feed. So we feed them barley. So we'll just chuck barley down and they'll scratch about, and their scratching will scratch out all of the competing plants. And then to kind of try and keep that pressure of those plants down, as I said, we then mulch with any of the bedding that comes out of the chicken house. So agroforestry isn't necessarily just for us about cows and trees, so that is one of my most favourite things. It's also about using other livestock, other animals to try and help us to engineer our agro-ecosystem so that it's as healthy as possible without using any chemicals, any kind of input. We like to think of ourselves as being, you know, trying to be beyond organic, like we don't use any inputs at all, any chemical inputs at all, and trying to kind of reduce any sort of medical inputs for our cattle as much as possible. That's also kind of our aim. I can see Nina's just busy, maybe doing good night, so that's fine. I'm just going to answer Peter's question. Have you lost many of your chickens to foxes? No, we've lost 2 to buzzards, which was interesting, kind of seeing, yeah, one of them I caught in the act, but no, we haven't lost any to foxes. We have a couple of sheep farms flanking us, and we have farmers who lamp, and so the fox pressures kind of kept down. Okay, next slide. So I'm just this. I think this is just gratuitous cows in trees photos from now on. So again, just evidence of cows getting under the trees. Another reason for small native hardy breed is that they fit under the trees. So you can see someone asked earlier about winter coats. This is right in the middle of winter. You can see how hairy they are and how they get right underneath those trees for the kind of shelter and protection. Next photo. So this is a similar part of our ground. So this is one of the laneways that I talked about, and we use this as kind of like a natural barn. So these trees act as a fantastic windbreak for our cattle, and it means that we can, as I said before, keep them out during the most horrendous winter. It does allow us, so we do get some sort of poaching, so trampling and like muddy kind of impact around the bottom of the trees where the cattle, if they're there for a little while, but we then rest it. So as I said, we won't then graze them there for the rest of the year, and they would only be in a section for a few days, like 3-4 days maximum in the winter. So that then gets rested for the rest of the year. So by planning our grazing in the way that we do, and I'll come to that in a second on another photo, the ground really does get rested. And this is where I'm going to touch on this idea of extensive or not grazing, because I kind of have a bit of an issue with the idea of extensive grazing in woodlands. Next photo. Next slide. Okay, so you can see here, this is 3 of our Shetlands, and you can see the electric fence in front, and you can see it runs behind as well. So they're in this paddock, which has got a mix of trees, and this is on kind of quite marginal, slightly like it's kind of edge of woodland that's been put onto this farm, and then it drops away towards hill ground. And yeah, it's absolutely stunning. One of my favourite places to graze, that where we take our cattle. And the idea of extensive grazing is a bit of an issue for me, because I believe that natural regeneration within woodland is entirely possible and is probably preferable to going in and planting. You haven't got all the kind of intervention, you haven't got tree tubes, you haven't got all that stuff going on, and actually the kind of plant genetics that are coming through from the plants that are already there is going to be more suited to the area that you're growing them in. So if you are extensively grazing cattle through woodland, you're going to have a similar problem to if you've got deer pressure on your woodland. So the idea of kind of just letting cattle roam through woods and letting them go wherever they want for extended periods of time, I personally would be concerned about the impact that would have. I wouldn't do that here. I'd be worried that they would be too quick to nip out some of the regenerating growth that's coming through, which would then potentially stunt any new trees that are growing and naturally regenerating. So this idea of mob grazing combined with agroforestry and applying holistic planned grazing means that we are, as I said, having this kind of intensive, short, sharp grazing period, and then the cattle move on. They may have taken some branches off, they may have knocked a couple of branches or broken them where they've been scratching, they've eaten and lifted the canopy to some extent of some of the younger trees, but then everything gets a rest, and they're not then going back and grazing it again and nibbling the top off that sapling once more and keeping on nibbling until it doesn't exist at all. So by thinking about time rather than number of animals is kind of the key thing for us, and it's about building in that rest and building in that recovery, which allows us to kind of really integrate our animals into this very interesting semi-farmed landscape. It's pretty wild, it's kind of farmed, but only for very short periods of the year, and allows us to actually produce a service, if you like, for our grazing clients. So we are helping them to create more diversity in the sward. So the cattle go through, they'll eat, they'll trample, gives an opportunity for different flowers and different plants to come up. Some of these tufted grasses that you see at the front can get into quite heavy, chunky tufts. And they can become quite unstable actually, and the cattle go through and kind of knock them over, and then you've got this area that brand new species can come up, and it gives an opportunity for more diversity in the sport. So we found kind of having native cattle in these very marginal wooded edge of the wild areas working really, really well. I saw that somebody asked about, can you only do agroforestry with native cattle? And I'd say no, but cattle are all native to somewhere. So for example, Simmental cattle that we see a lot of here in Scotland for beef cattle were originally alpine dairy cattle. So, you know, for them in the alpine, in Swiss Alps or somewhere, they would be, you know, perfectly suited to those kind of wooded areas. So for us, because it's such marginal ground and because we don't have that opportunity to kind of bring them in, then them being native fulfills our needs in terms of you know, their hardiness and how much we can push them. Okay, next photo. So I think the next photo is Georgia, who is the kind of on the slide for the advert for this. And this is Georgia eating rowan, or rowan, if you're living south of the border. I've got used to saying it in the Scottish way now, it's rowan. And it's one of her absolute favourite trees. She will knock everybody out the way to get to this. Absolutely loves it. And we found that they particularly enjoy it during the, I'm just going to turn my video off because it's saying that my internet connection is unstable and I don't want to lose you. So particularly enjoy it in the springtime. So yeah, they will really go through and munch that March, April, just as the leaves are coming through. Not so interested in it now, more interested in willow at the moment. So we are seeing seasonal differences. Okay, do you want to move on to the next slide? I don't know if it's, oh yeah, so this is a similar sort of part of the ground. So again, you can see that where we're grazing, that time that we're giving the cattle, that we're giving the ground away, you know, not having the cattle on it means that the grasses can come through, the different plants can come through, and we get some really fantastic grazing. Next slide. I think this next one, even when there's no leaves on the trees, the cattle will congregate under trees. There's some really interesting research that talks about the kind of radius of influence that trees have on the soil beneath them. Again, you can see our electric fence set up here. And again, you know, this is kind of maybe March, April time. At this time of the year, the grass, you know, a lot of this was actually deferred grazing. So none of this had been grazed at all the previous year, and it was all just left. And these cattle are just phenomenal at going through and eating the kind of stuff that's like knocked over, lignified, a little bit dead looking grass, and they will still maintain condition. They will look fantastic on it, even though you think, how on earth are they getting any nutrient value from it? But again, it's that hardiness that native cattle are able to be outwintered, come through the winter, eat what looks like the saddest pasture, but still maintain that really good condition. Next photo. I think I've realised that I haven't got any photos of our white Galloways in all of this. I think I managed to download the photos and then not put them on the PowerPoint. So apologies to Alistair if you were hoping to see them. I'll see if I can get one up in a second. Sorry about the quality of this photo, it's not great. Again, just showing a different, you know, some of the photos I've shown you have been quite young woodland. This is a more established, very old, like much older silver birch woodland. And again, you can just see that the grass there is, yeah, I think there's anemones as well coming through there, wood anemones. So plants and grasses and the flowers that come through. Again, moving the cattle on means that we don't kind of completely scalp the grass. They don't take all of the flowers off. Next photo. Only a couple more photos to go, folks, and we'll get on to questions. So was really interested to see the amount of time that this red cow, Yora, so she came down from Shetland, came on the boat a few weeks ago. Really lovely cow from a farmer who does really interesting stuff that we are really kind of interested in, his very low input organic system. Now, bearing in mind on Shetland, it's pretty bleak and there's not many trees. This cow and her 3-month-old calf have been just settling into the trees so quickly. And the calf, we've seen him eating willow, eating rowan, happily munching on and browsing on the trees, following the other cattle. So it's very interesting to see that for this calf who hasn't grown up with trees for the first few months of his life has very quickly settled into kind of being in an agroforestry system. Next photo. This is just to show you the practical benefits of managing Kiwi tech in an agroforestry system. You don't need as many end posts. You can just use trees. They're much stronger than posts, plastic posts, and do a fantastic job. So quite a lot of our electric polywire ends up at a tree, or if it goes around a corner, we have insulated, little insulated like plastic debris, I don't know what you'd call them, the wire runs through. That means that we can then go around corners with using trees. And one last photo. I think this one, I absolutely love this picture. So this is our neighbour's sheep. And if you look in the middle of the photo, you can see that there is a sheep who is browsing from the trees. And so it's really been lovely to see a neighbour also kind of bringing their animals into the woods. So these are the opposite of the lane, opposite side of the lane to the woods that we graze, that you see lots of photos of. And yeah, just lovely to see that kind of idea of letting livestock into the woods and not excluding them is something that we're seeing more of. And yeah, we've sort of got neighbours getting involved in that as well, which is really lovely. So I think I just had a few conclusions to finish with, which were that agroforestry, I think there's maybe another slide, Nina. Agroforestry provides these ecosystem services beyond fuel, fibre and food. It gives us kind of the shelter, it helps our with nutrients, and it does enable our animals to access a range of nutrients not always present in grasses, which really are excuse me, beneficial to health and mean that we can reduce the external inputs, which helps with cost saving. Trees offer a range of shelter benefits, which means it can regulate their temperature throughout the year, helping them to be more productive. Again, there's an economic benefit to this. And then livestock make use of the trees again, tie behind, which help them to display natural behaviours. So those are the four kind of key takeaways, I guess, that hopefully will be of interest to you, and that I've been able to kind of illustrate a little bit with some of the photos. I'm just going to have a swig of tea and also try and get some of these videos up, because it would be really nice to have a look at those. Do you want to stop sharing, Nina, and I'll just see if I can get these videos up?
Yeah, I'll do that now. Oh. Have I stopped sharing?
I think you're still sharing, unless I've got a lag.
Yeah, just.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll start sharing.
I hope that's possible.
And then
probably, yeah. Great.
Oh, goodness me. Bear with me a second. I just need to optimize for video clips. There we go. Can you see YouTube?
Yay.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so here is a video of a tree hay bouquet. So if you don't have trees, you'll see that okay. Are you getting that video? I can't see you, so someone will have to tell me yes or no. Anybody?
Can you hear me, Nikki?
No, I can now, yeah.
Sorry. Can you make it full screen? It was quite, we can see it, but it's quite
okay,
small.
yeah, sure. So this is one of our heifers. She had a bit of a runny nose, and they were in a field that it had trees around the outside, but not necessarily that she was able to access, and she's the bottom of the pile, so she gets bullied a bit by the others. So I just picked a selection of goat, willow, and there's another willow in there, and possibly some hazel, and just took her a bouquet to have a munch, because I was just a bit worried. I just thought she looked a bit under the weather, and yeah, she munched a lot. So if you don't have trees that you can give them direct access to, then you can always kind of just cut some, a bit like tree hay, I guess. Again, just a video here of head scratching. Now that is an important moment just there, because she has just put her head down and selected docks, even though there's a whole pile of different lovely grasses surrounding her. So I talked earlier about our cattle being really interested in docks, and yeah, that's her selecting docks by choice. This is Betty, who's my favourite heifer. And she here has taken a willow branch, or she's stripped willow twigs off the tree, and you can just see her eating them there. And I think I've got one more video. Oh, this is another nice scratching natural behaviour video. Perfectly shaped branch for a good old neck scratch. So that was back in the spring. And I'll stop sharing. So I hope that has been useful and a little bit interesting, and maybe we've got lots of questions to go through.
Yes, there are some questions. So I'm going to not read them out, but ask people to ask them yourself. So Tam, you had a question on the main differences since starting holistic grazing. Do you want to ask that in the group?
Hi, yes, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to, well, we're really interested in starting to use holistic management, and we're just starting to learn about planned grazing. So I was just really interested in knowing what some of the differences were that Nikki had seen when she started to use or work with planned grazing.
Yeah, sure. So we have found that, well, there's a range of different benefits. So we have maintained ground cover, so we don't overgraze. So that means that we are able to kind of, our plants are photosynthesizing more because there's more plant left. So we're not necessarily seeing the benefit of that, other than we know that it's happening, and that we know that that will lead to healthier soils, and we'll know that that will lead to healthier plants. We're definitely seeing more diverse sward. So we're seeing different species coming through that weren't there before. Different plants, different flowers particularly coming through. We're seeing a range of different insects, and interestingly we've noticed that just something my husband was talking about yesterday was we have a few hen pheasants around here who breed and don't always successfully raise their poults, and we found that they tend to follow the cows. And I know that lots of people will follow cattle with chickens, and that there's a real link between kind of birds and kind of using the dung as a food source for different beetles and insects and things. And we've really seen that this hen pheasant, who this is the first year she's managed to maintain all 6, I think, of her poults, until 2 sadly got run over the other day. But yeah, we've watched her just follow the cattle, and they've had the taller grass for habitat. They've got the edges where the paddocks are, so that means you've kind of got lower grass where they've been in and trampled. And it also just, I think the thing for us is it helps us plan the grazing. We're able to know where the cattle are going to be. So we plan, the way that we integrate agroforestry into that is that we know that we want them in the hottest weather to have trees and in the coldest weather to have trees. So we plan that first, and then we basically fill in the gaps with all the other grazing that we have. And what we've been able to show, and the interesting kind of more diverse swords we see coming back, has led us to be able to increase our kind of grazier clients. And we've now got requests this winter to go and help with forest floor restoration by grazing our cattle using holistic planned grazing and bale grazing to promote diversity in the forest understory or the woodland understory for some locals. So we've definitely seen benefits, and I really recommend, just a little plug for Clem, who's here, the work that Clem has been doing with the Soil Association Scotland is really interesting, and there's some resources coming out in the next month or so which will highlight some of the benefits. So would definitely recommend looking at that in a bit more detail. And if you're on Twitter, if you look at the Soil Association Scotland latest tweets, there's some stuff about the mob grazing field lab and the upcoming resources. To be able to find them there. Sorry, I'm doing lots of plugs today.
That's good. We need them. I had another question on the chat quite a while ago. Kay Brewster, you asked, how much rest is needed. Do you want to just ask your question yourself?
Yeah, sure. I was just interested in, Nikki had mentioned that rather than extensive, this kind of mob grazing, and so I was just interested in how long those periods would be when she kind of moved the stock out of an area. Would it be weeks or would it be months?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it can really depend. It depends on what the management goals are for that particular bit of ground. And it also depends on how many people now we have asking us to go and graze for them. So it's it can depend on both things. But yeah, it can be weeks. So in one area that we're grazing, which isn't an agroforestry area, it's some pasture that we rented this summer, with our beautiful white Galloway cattle that we have on there. That will have had just weeks of rest. So they will have moved around and grazed between May and now. They will have grazed each paddock, if you like, 3 times. So they're just on their 3rd rotation now. Whereas some of our wooded areas will have been grazed once in a year. So it really just depends on how wet the area is, what we're trying to get out of the area in terms of animal productivity, or what aims we have in terms of biodiversity, or whether we just want to quickly skim over and just to encourage growth at the start of the year. So there's lots of things about time of the year, what we want to get out of it, that impact on how quickly we move the animals. It sounds complex, but once you're doing it, you get an eye for it, and you kind of get into the flow.
Thanks, Kate. So we also have Tim, you asked something about support for establishing agroforestry. Let me just say there's a few questions that people answered in the chat, directly to each other, so I won't read them out. But Tim, the support for establishing agroforestry, you wanted to know about that. You're welcome to ask the question directly.
Oh, hi, Nikki. Yeah, sorry. Just wanted to know what support has been available to you in Scotland, or have you used any support for agroforestry? I know you have one, but I don't think there's any around it.
Yeah, we don't take any subsidy. I kind of have like a political issue with having food production subsidised, and I know that lots of people don't agree with that, and I totally respect folk who want to, for whom it's an integral part of their business. But because we choose, I guess you could say that I subsidise our system by working another job. So we don't take any subsidy at all. We don't take any grants. The only thing we have had is support from the Woodland Trust for our hedges, and that was through the More Hedges scheme. But so they give you the trees, they give you the plants, and you pay for the stakes and the other kit and stuff. So we have had some support from Woodland Trust, but that wasn't through kind of rural payments or grants or subsidies. There are agroforestry grant funding available. It is available in Scotland, and I think Kirsten has put the link on the chat. And there's a group that is being led by Poppy Frater out of SAC, who are at the RIS, so the Rural Innovation Support Service, I think it stands for, Agroforestry Group, who are currently, of which I'm a member, who are currently looking at how we can make funding more accessible, how we can kind of influence policy around grant decision making. And I think there's recently been another round of small scale, like £1,000 grants for crofters and farmers to have kind of planning support for planning woodland. One of the challenges is then, though, that these schemes kind of lock it out of agroforestry for 15 years. So I'm really interested in how we can support people to use things like flexible, semi-permanent and mobile fencing, so that these areas don't have to be shut off from animals for a set period of time. Because I think that can be off-putting for folk if they think, oh, I'm going to lose it out of production. Where am I going to put my cattle? But if we can try and help people to be a bit more flexible in how they think about semi-permanent or temporary fencing, then those might still be able to graze those areas.
Next we have Alejandro. Alejandro, you had a couple of questions, I think.
No, just one, and has been partially answered by the previous question. So my question is, how was the beginning of this journey for you and your husband? But you answer more or less that you are not taking any subsidies, but you are still relying on your previous job. So how did you start? What is the profitability of your business? You understand?
Yeah, sure. So we're still in really early stages in terms of profitability. So our aim at the moment is that we break even on the cattle, which we are aiming to do this year. And that for us it's been a massive learning curve. So although I was head of department at Agricultural College, my practical agricultural experience has been fairly limited, and the same for my husband. So he's gone back to uni to do agriculture at university. And we both also work, and I'm obviously also studying my master's, so we have quite a lot going on. So we've been viewing these first I'd say 2 years as a learning curve more than a kind of focused business model. So any costs have been attributed for us in terms of like a learning cost or an opportunity. You know, we've had the opportunity to learn from our mistakes, and but we wouldn't have been able to get started if it hadn't have been for the woodland, because we just don't have, and if we hadn't have gone for native cattle, because the ability to outwinter them, the ability when the horrendous weather comes, just to put them under the trees and know that they will be kind of safe and dry and warm, has just meant that we haven't had to think about, right, how do we apply for a small farm grant to pay for a shed that actually would be really difficult on our ground. Where on earth would we put that? You know, it's quite tricky to kind of think about the scale of landscaping for that kind of infrastructure. So we will aim, our kind of planning, our business planning puts us profitable next year, because we've had some other costs around renting additional grazing this year that we and that's something that I would say is, so we only own 18 acres and the rest of our grazing is through, originally was just through kind of local like neighbours saying, oh yeah, you can come and graze this, we can come and graze that. And the challenge for us was we wanted to grow our numbers, but we couldn't when it's just on like an informal verbal agreement. So we took on we paid more than we should have done for some summer grazing because we knew that we wanted to get beef production this year. So that was a priority for us this year. And in addition, but since we did that, it's like buses. Now suddenly we've got people saying, yeah, we'll go into a grazing arrangement with you. Yes, we're happy to sign this to say that you can have the grazing. We've now set up as a grazier business. So it's we've now got kind of more grounds than we're going to be understocked going into the winter. So actually, that's a really nice position to be in, and it means that we can then, as we, you know, we've had the bull in, and we'll be able to hopefully then have calves next year, that we will be able to grow the herd, and we've got plenty of land to do that. But I would say that for, you know, for people, having land is obviously a challenge, and that's been a real kind of theme through the conference, that land access is an issue. But if you can get land that doesn't have infrastructure, you can still have cattle and sheep, because you can go for native breeds and integrate them into woodland, and that kind of gives you the same benefits. Sorry, that's a very long-winded answer. Any more questions?
Yeah, sorry. Did you tell us how much cattle or sheep did you have?
Yeah, we have 10 plus 2 calves at the moment, so we're still very small scale.
Right, and apologies, but I couldn't get the reason. Why did you start this? Why?
Because we had this ground and we knew that we wanted to promote effective ecological functioning. And I think I mentioned at the start, but maybe you missed that bit. My husband went to a talk that was put on by the Soil Association of Scotland with Rob Havard, who's a holistic management kind of mob grazing expert. And he's also an ecologist, and he was talking about ecological functioning and the benefits of holistic plan management, and holistic plan grazing. And we thought, yeah, that's what we want to do. That's absolutely what we want to do. We want to restore ecological functioning and have high levels of biodiversity, and we want to be able to manage the water cycle on our ground, and we want to ensure that nutrients stay in the ground, they don't leach into the river, because our ground runs down to the river. So for us, responsible land management had to include cattle. and that's where we started. And I also missed the cattle from the farm at the college that was down south, so it kind of made sense.
Apologies, but that grant that you are telling us, you apply for that grant, don't you?
Which grant?
I understood that everything started because you have a grant.
No, we don't have a grant.
Sorry. Thank you.
That's all right.
I think Alejandro, I think Nikki said have the land and the ground, not a grant. Yeah. So
Sorry.
I thought it's all right. There are still quite a few questions. Maybe we can group a couple. So if Bill, you wanted to talk about mitigating climate change, and Claire, you also had some comments on welfare benefits. Do you just want to ask those two, Bill and Claire, and then you can answer them together, Nikki? Or, you know, like after each other, but we collect them.
With respect, you know, I think the climate change question, it's too big really to lump in with the other. So, you know, if there's time at the end, could we come back to that?
Okay, great, Bill. So Claire, go for it, and then maybe John can ask the next question. So we have John asking about dual purpose cattle. So maybe Claire and John together then.
Hi, babe. Hi, Nikki. Sorry, I just said hi because I'm talking to my other half.
Hi, Claire.
I see your voice. I was actually just talking about the welfare benefits. It was really good to hear about all the welfare benefits provided and the freedom to express natural behaviours, which is one of the sort of 5 welfare freedoms that we consider when we look at welfare, and obviously really important for your livestock. But my question was actually about minerals. So you've talked about buying in minerals. I was just wondering if you still use any, or if you test your cattle for anything at all.
No, we don't. We don't buy in anything, so like no minerals at all. And we are aiming to test, I think, next year. I'm hoping to do that as part of my dissertation. So my plan is to do some basically test to see what mineral deficiencies they might have, and then do some comparisons between different groups of native cattle having access to free choice minerals and trees, and then cows that have access to free choice minerals and not trees. So the testing will be done as part of that. Obviously there's a bit of a cost to that. So yeah, that's on the cards for next year. But we fecal egg count, and we have returns of 0. So something's obviously working, and I think that's probably a mix of the rotation, you know, kind of moving them daily and then having fresh grass every single day, and the access to the trees. We also do put in apple cider vinegar into their drinking water every now and again, particularly when it's like warm and wet, and I think that helps and contributes as well.
Oh, looking forward to the results of that. Thanks, babe.
No worries.
Nikki, you talked about dual or triple purpose cattle. I wondered, after listening to your fantastic story, how you're going to market your beef, and will you be doing milk and milk products as well?
Yeah, so we market the beef as pasture and woodland fed, and our beef is available from November. So if anyone's interested, what's that, like the 10th plug of this talk, then really happy to have a chat with folk about that. And the milk, I actually recently went on a micro dairying course, so it's something that I'm really interested to start next year, possibly just as initially with a house cow, and then seeing how we can kind of potentially scale that up. So yeah, Shetlands have phenomenal milkiness. They really, there's some fantastic images if you look on the Shetland Cattle Herd Book Society or the Shetland Cattle Breeders Association websites, on their galleries. There's some, you know, pictures of Shetland cows with like 4 calves suckling, and they're, you know, they're super milky, and they have really high butter fat content, and there's some there are some A2 genetics as well in Shetland, so real beneficial milk that you can get from them. So yeah, we would like to at some point have something going on with dairy, but at the moment, again, infrastructure is the issue in terms of processing. In Scotland, it's illegal to sell raw milk, so we would have to pasteurize. So there's kind of quite a lot of work around kind of managing that and thinking about it. And yeah, Peter just made that comment about milking them and having them in different locations is a challenge. And I've actually been really lucky to go and visit some micro dairies that are implementing holistic planned grazing, and just to see like how they're doing that. So how are you moving your cattle every day on a small scale, you know, without kind of having that negative impact on the ground, without the cost of, you know, fancy tracks and all that sort of stuff. So yes, having a look at what the options would be. And my husband is absolutely convinced that he's going to train a pair of steer calves to be draft animals, because again, Shetlands have that history of being draft cattle. So yeah, that's his plan for next year, I think. So that will be fun.
Great. And then we have Rod had also an important question. And there's lots of things happening on the chat that are more comments than questions. So I won't call them all up, but it's really worth watching the chat.
Really asking if they damage the bark for the trees, and also if you've had them in any orchard areas and what they do with the apple trees.
No, we haven't had them in any orchards, and that's something I'm really interested in exploring further. And I know that there's a few other folk that are doing that down south, and I think possibly Johnny Balfour is planning that at Balburney Home Farm, so maybe keep an eye on him on social media. I think he is planning some agroforestry. I'm not sure if that's with apples or not in an orchard situation, but yeah, I'm really interested in developing that at some point in the future. No, we haven't seen them damage the bark. They knocked a tree over 2 days ago, but I think it was a bit old. It was probably going to go anyway. We're trying to work out whether it was a bit of, you know, overzealous bomb scratching of cows on the tree. So, you know, they will, but I think this was really interesting. I had a great opportunity to chat to the team who are running the bringing in bison to the woodland in Kent. And we were having the conversation about like why bison, and they were saying, oh, well, because of the, you know, the ecosystem engineering benefits, and they take trees out. And I keep saying that we'll send them some Shetlands down, because yeah, their kind of ability to if a tree is dying, then yeah, they'll push against it and rub against it, and it will contribute to that kind of breakdown that you'd expect to see in woodland areas anyway. So in terms of damaging the bark, no, because again, they're in, and then when they're out, you know, we move them, so they're on this constant movement. So if they're in and they are rubbing up against some bark and it knocks off, they won't be back there for months. So again, it, you know, it's got that opportunity and time to heal.
Great, thank you.
I can see that. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I can see that somebody's put about cattle love eating apples, walnuts, and acorns straight from the tree, and that they'll go on their back legs to reach up into the trees. I would love to see a photo of that. So, John, if you can get any photos or video, I would love to see that. That's great.
And maybe this is the moment to get back to Bill's big question on climate change, and because there isn't any direct questions left. And then, of course, the floor is open maybe for a few minutes as well afterwards for people to jump in and ask anything that comes to mind or make any comments.
So Bill, you raised your question was about the benefits of wood pasture for mitigating climate change and how it can counteract the drive to monoculture plantation forestry. And I think that's really interesting, because I had a bit of a strop on Twitter a few weeks ago when I saw an article that'd been written about the benefits of agroforestry in Scotland. And what I basically read was, don't grow barley in that field, plant a plantation of woodland instead. And it was basically, you know, for timber. And I got a bit annoyed with that, because I thought, well, you're basically taking out one monocrop, one monoculture, and replacing it with another one, and I can't really see the benefit of that. So there is definitely a push, and you know, rightly so, for a more resilient and secure timber industry by growing timber here and using timber for, you know, house building and various other things. And there's lots of benefits to that. But I think you're right, Bill, that you know, the opportunity to integrate wood pasture and how that is a, you know, a mitigating factor in terms of climate change. It really does. I think what we have to be careful of is looking at, and I know that you're not doing this at all, Bill, so I know your views on this, that, you know, we can't just look at climate change alone. We have to think about biodiversity loss, and we have to think about water management. We have to think about the wider catchment and nutrients. And there's all these things that kind of come together. So we have to be you know, if we're just wanting to, if our only aim in life is to sequester carbon, then yeah, just plant loads of trees. But actually, we don't just want to do that, because if we do that, we'll be having, you know, complete biodiversity losses in 20, 30 years time, even worse than we're heading towards now. So we have to try and manage all these things and think about how are we going to manage them all and keep all these plates spinning. So for the best case scenario, then I think, yeah, having the sequestration benefits of trees alongside cattle grazing to promote biodiversity, to ensure healthy soils and all those other things. I can see Robert is waving, so I'm guessing you want to come in there, Robert, and as an expert you'll probably be able to be far more articulate on this than I am. So do you want to just come in?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to profess to be an expert, but I do a lot of work on soil carbon sequestration in different ecosystem types, and I think it's really key that we appreciate how important grasslands are for long-term carbon storage, and actually the disturbance that's created, especially in organic soils. I mean the physical disturbance when we are planting trees is poorly quantified in terms of changing carbon exchange between the land and the atmosphere. And there are, especially from a UK perspective, very few data that we can reliably sort of lean on. I'm working on this a little bit in the Cairngorm, so it's all very exciting. But from the perspective of what you're talking about with biodiversity, water purification and water retention, also soil biodiversity, let's not forget, all of the positive attributes associated with landscape appreciation and well-being that we might get from a landscape, and the added benefit of food and timber in a combined setting, agroforestry does have a huge potential. And from work that I've been doing in the Swiss Jura Mountains, which have been practicing silvopastoral techniques for way over 1,000 years, the system where you have a very low intensity grazing in a kind of wooded pasture system is the best for all of these things. And I really feel that we have the potential, and I know Bill is very excited about this, and I'm really excited about trying to work with Bill on this, of using this wonderful resource that we have of people like yourself and others that are doing this to ask that very simple question, you know, how good is this for soil carbon? Because it is just not quantified in hyperoceanic systems like we have in the UK. And we should definitely try and do that, because it would be a very important way of supporting this system, I think.
That's really interesting, Robert, because I think in my own sort of undertaking research and as part of my studies that, you know, we know that quite often woodland will get, so for example, there's research around the carbon sequestration potential for grassland, well, a field, a pasture, and then compared to a silver pasture or woodland grazing area, and the carbon stock potential above ground is obviously higher when you're integrating trees because the kind of mass above the ground. But quite often, and this, you know, has to happen because of the way science kind of works, but it can become quite reductionist and then doesn't allow us to look at the more complex ecosystems and looking at things in a more holistic way and thinking about all of the different elements that exist. So yes, there might be a different carbon sequestration, but we also have to think about, like, the soil and the health and all these other things. I know that there's some research being planned that looks at much more in the round by I think Lisa Norton at Newcastle is possibly leading on it, you know, trying to explore that more farm ecosystem landscape view, and there's great potential for that as the research agenda shifts to being far more inclusive and, you know, move away from being reductionist and looking at just one particular outcome. So I think that there's opportunity there. Bill, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Nikki. So I think the problem is there's already so much momentum that's built up around the need to just be planting trees that it's going to be more difficult than we would like to get the idea across that wall-to-wall trees is not the best solution. And so we need some good evidence, some good arguments to counter this, to support what we would like to see. And I have a couple of suggestions about where we can score in that regard. So one is there's an increasing amount of evidence to suggest that livestock that have access to tree leaves in their diet produce less methane. So that's something I think we need. And the evidence isn't from this country; it's from Colombia and South America. You know, so we need to home in on this. So there's a possibility of innovative farmers, and we discussed this in one of the sessions last week. So I'm hoping that, you know, we may get the opportunity to actually look at that in practice. The other thing is that the climate is going to change. It's going to get a lot hotter, and the big risk with planting lots of trees is that in a few years' time, they'll be at great risk of going up in smoke. You know, wildfires are likely, and you know, we've seen in long periods of drought and hot weather that our vegetation can catch fire as well. So one of the best ways of avoiding that is to have livestock grazing under your trees to remove the tinderbox of dry vegetation that will inevitably accumulate if you just leave them to do their own thing. So those two arguments, I think, are really worth grabbing hold of and making sure we make best use of them in this discussion about what kind of land use we want.
So Bill, that's so interesting. I just finished reading a book by a guy called Philip Connors called Fire. Oh, I can't remember the name of it now, but he basically he spends part of his year every year as a kind of fire watchman in New Mexico, looking for fires in the woodlands. And he is very damning of cattle and very damning of grazing, and talks about them being the reason why wildfires have got so much worse. And I think, yeah, you're right that we are at a point now in the UK and in Europe where we can start. We know potentially that, well, I think we pretty much know it's coming. You know, that it will become drier, it will become hotter, the risk is increasing. And we're at a place now, as you rightly say, where we can almost mitigate for that by changing our land use systems and thinking about how we integrate animals in a way that prevents and, you know, that allows us to adapt. So that's, yeah, really, really interesting thoughts. I'm really conscious that it's 1 minute to 9, so we should probably stop. I'd quite happily stay here all evening and chat to the really interesting folk in this talk. I'm so chuffed that you came along and came with your questions and your ideas and your expertise. It's been absolutely fantastic to hear from so many of you and some really interesting questions. Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm really happy to take further questions or extend the chat on social media. So as I put at the beginning, you'll find me at Howmill or at Grampian Graziers. A few of you I know a little bit anyway, so you've probably got my email address. So yeah, get in touch. We'd love to chat to folk and come and visit us if you're ever in Aberdeenshire.
Thank you so much, Nikki. This was a brilliant session, and I think everybody seems to think so as well. There's lots of things coming in. So the recording will go up on the website soon. I'm not exactly sure what is planned, but I'll save it now. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks.